Good afternoon, and welcome to the presidential lecture this year. It's a pleasure to have all of you with us, and it is a real treat to introduce the son of a UNI alumnus, Dr. Richard Verma. Richard Verma serves as the Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources. In his role, he acts as the Chief Operating Officer of the department. We've got to fix that one. Are we ready now, Keith? Okay. Thank you. I'll begin again. Richard Verma serves as the Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources. In his role, he acts as the Chief Operating Officer for the department and leads the department's efforts in modernization, foreign assistance, and a wide range of workforce and strategic issues. Deputy Secretary Verma previously served as the U.S. Ambassador to India and Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs and as National Security Advisor to the Senate Majority Leader. Richard has also had a distinguished career in the private sector, serving as a Chief Legal Officer and Head of Global Public Policy for MasterCard, a former partner at the law firm of Steptoe and Johnson, and the Vice Chairman of the Asia Group. He also served on the board at T. Rowe Price. Deputy Secretary Verma is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and recipient of numerous awards and civilian decorations, including the Meritorious Service Medal and the State Department's Distinguished Service Award. He is also the recipient of the Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellowship and the Chief Justice Marshall Lifetime Achievement Award. Deputy Secretary Verma received his doctorate degree from Georgetown University and his law degree from American University and his bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Lehigh University. Please join me in welcoming Deputy Secretary of State Richard Verma.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to get the audio straight. And President Nook, thank you. It is really a great honor to be here. I really appreciate the invitation to join you all today and the incredible hospitality that you and Mrs. Nook have shown throughout my time here. And I really am honored to be here. I've heard so much about this institution throughout my entire life, and I've been hoping to visit here for a long time. And this institution holds a special place in our family's history. And having seen the campus and met earlier today with several incredible students and faculty, I'm sorry I wasn't able to come sooner. But in any case, I'm thrilled to be here now. It was 61 years ago, in 1963, my father fulfilled his own American dream, arriving in New York City with $14 and a Greyhound bus ticket. We heard this story so many times, and he told it to so many people. Sometimes he would have $22, sometimes he would have $14, but you get the point. He started over with next to nothing. But what makes this story so special today is that that bus ticket brought him on a 2-day journey about which we heard every detail, however embellished it may have been, right here to Cedar Falls, Iowa, where he completed a specialist in education degree at the then State College of Iowa and is now UNI. He took a big risk. He left my mom and 4 siblings behind in India to take the chance of a lifetime and pursue his dream of a better life for his family. Now, 1963 was a tumultuous year, both in India and here in the United States. My dad left India only 16 years after its independence and arrived here in the middle of the American Civil Rights Movement. Yet the people of Cedar Falls welcomed my dad with open arms. You took care of him. You educated him. You gave him the courage to go off and get his PhD. My dad went on to complete that doctorate in Canada and then settled our whole family in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where I was raised, He taught and studied literature in the University of Pittsburgh system for 43 years. So from one Panthers institution to another, from UNI to Pitt. My dad passed away in March of this year, just shy of his 92nd birthday. But my family and I will be forever grateful for what the people of this university, for what the people of Iowa did to make his dream possible, his real life field of dreams. Now, my own return to India just one generation later as the U.S. ambassador, and my standing here as the Deputy Secretary of State on the same campus where my father started living his American dream, could really only be possible here in America. President Reagan referred to our nation as a, quote, shining city and beacon on the hill. America has lived up to and exceeded those lofty aspirations for our family, and the people of this area showed the best of America. And for that, on behalf of my father and my entire family, I thank you. I'm about 60 years late in doing so. Now, we've entitled this talk, Foreign Policy Starts at Home. It's something that Secretary Blinken and President Biden say repeatedly, but what does that actually mean? Well, for us, it means that we have to ensure the work we are doing around the world delivers for people across the country in their daily lives and in the things that matter to them and their families. Opening up markets, helping to lower energy prices, ensuring supply chains are secure and reliable, responding to emergencies, trying to create a more peaceful and prosperous planet, building academic, research, and people-to-people connections, all with the hope of making your lives, your communities, stronger, safer, and better. But when we say foreign policy begins at home, we also mean just that. Much of the real work of foreign policy takes place in cities, in counties, and states across America. And yes, right here in Iowa, here in Cedar Falls, here at UNI. You may not believe that, but I intend to give you a few real examples of how you all have a role to play and in U.S. foreign policy. And as history shows, it is a role you have played well. So I'm going to cover three areas briefly, super briefly, and then I look forward to your questions. First, I'd like to talk about what the State Department does and how it impacts the people of Iowa. Secondly, the role of cities and states in furthering relationships around the world. And finally, bring foreign policy home to all of you in this room and how you, to some degree, can practice and affect foreign policy in your day-to-day life. So, who are the people of the State Department and what do we do? We are some 78,000 employees working at over 270 locations around the world, mostly at embassies and consulates, but also in international organizations like the United Nations and its agencies, and with our military partners at combatant commands and everywhere in between. Of those 78,000, slightly more than 14,000 are Foreign Service officers. That means you've taken the Foreign Service exam, both oral and written, and you've decided you want to make diplomacy some part of your career. We also have nearly 13,000 civil servants, career government employees, and public servants who work mainly in the United States, but also are posted in key positions around the world. The Foreign Service and civil service come from every state in the country, including right here in Iowa. In fact, the president was telling me that there are 10 graduates of UNI currently at the State Department. Now, the balance of our employees, approximately 2/3, are locally employed staff, generally residents of the countries in which we have our overseas posts. We take on this work of diplomacy at a critical and complex time in world affairs. The president refers to this period as an inflection point, a point where many of our systems for order and peace that we built in the 20th century are now under threat, a point where more countries are demanding a seat at the global high table, and a point where we are facing what appear to be a growing number of traditional and not so traditional threats. Now, since becoming Deputy Secretary, I've visited 45 countries. It's in 20 months. I don't recommend that to you, by the way. And 65 of our embassies and consulates around the world, in addition to several of our domestic facilities around the country. I've traveled the world not to collect frequent flyer miles, but to see the global challenges firsthand, to discover what our people in the field need, and to better understand how we can support their efforts to deliver for the American people. Now, our foreign policy apparatus is contending with a war in Ukraine, conflict in the Middle East, instability in Africa, deeply focused on competing with China on a global scale. We have to deal with malign state actors in Russia, North Korea, Iran, and beyond. And yes, the threat of terrorism endures. Yesterday, we marked the devastating one-year anniversary of the deadly terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas. Since that time, we've witnessed tragic suffering to both Israelis and Palestinians. And the United States is firmly committed to fostering lasting peace and stability across the region and building a common future of equal security, dignity, opportunity, and freedom for Israelis and Palestinians. But we also face transnational challenges such as climate change, pandemics, and global health, advancements in technology, both for good and bad, democratic retrenchment, and a pivot towards authoritarianism. Our Director of Central Intelligence, Bill Burns, likes to call these problems without passports, problems without passports. And many of these issues can lead to food and energy insecurity and migration on massive scales. When I step back and look at it all, it would be easy to get depressed, but I am not depressed. Every trip I take, I come back clear-eyed about the challenges we face, but even more inspired by the team of State Department and other U.S. government professionals and other Americans that I meet around the world. I come back feeling tremendous pride in their dedication, their commitment to our global mission, and their desire to advance American interests in all that they do. I see them conducting the difficult work of diplomacy between warring nations. I see them helping U.S. businesses make new connections and open new opportunities for trade. I see them providing humanitarian support along with our USAID and Peace Corps partners to people in need on every continent. I see them helping Americans who need a helping hand, perhaps with a lost passport, perhaps with an adoption, or maybe something even far more serious. Last year alone, we helped 90,000 Americans abroad in some sort of time of problem or crisis. And I see our teams working with our fellow national security partners to protect and defend the homeland. Beyond our workforce, however, I see a world with promise too. More people are being educated, more people are living longer, more people are connected to the internet and the modern economy, more people are voting than ever before, and more people are being lifted out of poverty. Yes, it is a difficult global landscape, to be sure, but I also see the potential for better days ahead. So let me try to bring it back home here. How does the work of the State Department affect Iowans? The department works tirelessly to promote American businesses overseas and create a level playing field for them to operate in foreign markets. These new markets lead to American jobs. Last year, nearly $33 billion worth of goods were exported from Iowa to international markets. More than a third of John Deere's revenue, for instance, comes from sales outside of the United States and Canada. And foreign direct investment, that's investment coming into the state, is responsible for nearly 70,000 Iowa jobs. But beyond business and commercial transactions, State Department programs are central to building people-to-people ties between countries, and those personal connections pay significant dividends. Our exchange programs brought nearly 20,000 visitors from overseas to Iowa last year, and you sent more than 2,800 Iowans abroad. The Bulgarian student making funnel cakes in Oka Boji as part of our summer work travel program this past summer, got the full American experience. It is impossible to predict the potential future impact of his time here or who he will become someday. In 1985, a 25-year-old Chinese bureaucrat from Beijing came to visit Muscatine on a State Department exchange to learn how Iowans excel in agriculture. Xi Jinping is now the president of China. When he came to the United States in 2012 as vice president, he stopped by Muscatine for dinner with his host from 1985. He told them, quote, "You were the first group of Americans I came into contact with. To me, you are America." And while we compete with China on a variety of fronts, people-to-people cooperation through exchanges remains one of the most important facets of our bilateral relationship with China. Arta Berisha of Kosovo arrived this year as the first ever Fulbright Scholar in residence here at UNI. She will use her cultural exchange to develop a textbook on media literacy and misinformation that will be adapted for both US and Balkan audiences. The State Department is working to make it easier for talented exchange visitors like Arta to stay at places like UNI, to study, to conduct research, and contribute to the fabric of our communities. International travel, for all its purposes, also plays a central role in America's growth and prosperity, and the State Department plays a critical role in facilitating it. The world is better connected than ever before, and more people are traveling internationally. That is a good development. You know, in 1990, only 5% of American citizens had a passport. Today, nearly half of Americans have a valid passport. We issued more than 24 million passports in the last 12 months, including 160,000 to Iowans, the most ever in a single year. Passports are being processed in less than half the time it took a year ago. And now we're making it easier than ever to renew your passport. We now offer the ability to renew your passport entirely online from the comfort of your own home or dorm room without going to the post office or a passport agency. More than 66 million people visited the United States last year, contributing $1.3 trillion and more than 15 million jobs to the US economy. We issued more visas over the past year than ever before. People came to the United States for tourism in New York, Florida, and California, sure, but they also came for reasons that directly impact Iowa's economy. More than 8,000 international students enrolled in Iowa's colleges and universities last year. Every one of them passed through a State Department consular section to get their student visa, just like my father did 61 years ago. Those students lucky enough to pursue higher education in Iowa contributed more than $250 million to Iowa's economy last year and were responsible for the creation of 1,700 jobs. Just here at UNI, international students contributed nearly $4 million to the university and the Cedar Valley economy. We issued visas to nearly 5,000 seasonal agriculture workers this year to assisting with harvesting Iowa crops. So what does this all cost, you might ask, our State Department enterprise? Well, out of every dollar in the federal budget, the Foreign Operations Appropriation, which funds the whole State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development, gets half of 1 cent. Out of every dollar, we get half of 1 penny. I would argue for that, for, again, 0.5% of the federal budget, the 78,000 employees of the State Department deliver far more in return for the American people and for the people of Iowa in particular, and I hope that you agree that you're getting your money's worth. So, we've covered a bit about what the State Department does and how it impacts people here at home, but as I noted, we're also quite aware that we're only one piece of the diplomatic effort. We know that state and local leaders are on the front lines of global issues: extreme weather, combating fentanyl, tackling pollution, addressing migration, and challenges to democracy. At the same time, these state and local leaders are also focused on creating good jobs and improving the economic outlook of their states and cities. All of these issues have an international nexus, and so depending on where you live, a county executive, a mayor, or a governor also needs to be engaged internationally. Just look at the number of mayors and governors who have entered into climate and clean energy agreements and commitments with foreign partners, including the group of 100 mayors who have come together across the United States and across the world to confront the climate crisis. Now, we call this focus, quote unquote, subnational diplomacy, which is simply a fancy name for the work of foreign relations that takes place beyond and outside the federal government, subnational diplomacy. And we count on these efforts, and we try to facilitate these connections however we can, because in the words of President Eisenhower when launching the Sister Cities initiatives in 1956, we recognize, quote, our faith in the great promise of people-to-people and sister city affiliations in helping build the solid structure of world peace, end of quote. And now hundreds of cities and towns across America participate in sister city agreements with cities around the world. And when done well, these programs can build new trade, research, and cultural ties that help each city and locality. For example, Dubuque just entered into a new agreement with Hermosillo, Mexico, that will lead to cooperation on urban development, electric vehicle infrastructure, and enhanced urban greenery. To help propel these efforts forward, Secretary Blinken launched the first ever Office of Subnational Diplomacy upon entering office, and it's led by the former deputy mayor of Los Angeles, who also happens to be a former U.S. ambassador. That office organized a trip I took this past summer to Armenia with a group of 10 American mayors from Glendale, California to Helena, Montana, seeking to engage with their Armenian municipal counterparts on key issues such as trade, technology, democracy, and human rights. Now, it was a groundbreaking trip in many ways, thanks to our participation in the U.S.-Armenia Local Democracy Forum, the first forum of its kind that the State Department has ever sponsored to bring our local leaders together. In addition to new city partnerships that we forged, the forum highlighted the criticality of bringing together our local officials to strategize, to communicate, and innovate. After all, these politicians and local administrators understand the grassroots of their countries perhaps better than anyone else. And again, right here in Iowa, Governor Reynolds led a 10-day trade mission to India last month. And when I met with her yesterday, I saw firsthand the importance of that visit to promoting Iowa's agricultural exports and creating prosperity for Iowa's farmers. And while the Departments of State and Agriculture played key roles in bringing people together, the impetus for the visit originated in state government. Now, I share these examples because they demonstrate a small sample of the way in which states, cities, and counties can positively affect our relationships with allies, friends, and partners around the world, and how those relationships directly and positively impact the lives of the American people. So we've covered the State Department. We've covered states, cities, and counties. Finally, I really want to highlight how individuals can impact foreign policy and the world in which we live. And one of the great privileges in my travels, I have come across Americans from all walks of life that have made their own global impact. Again, back to Armenia, I met Americans who are helping build innovation and technology ecosystems to attract more U.S. private sector investment and enhance the competitiveness of the Armenian engineering sector, which is critical given the constant stream of threats from Russia in the cyber and digital domain. I met Americans in India who oversee a tech incubator program that provides a platform for young Indian entrepreneurs to showcase their ideas and prototypes aimed at tackling key societal issues. I met Americans in Poland who run Jewish community centers and place great importance on Jewish cultural preservation to ensure we never forget the atrocities and trauma of the Holocaust. I spent time with Americans in the Philippines who spearheaded exchange programs that offer young Filipino students unparalleled educational opportunities at U.S. universities. I've met countless people here at home whose day-to-day work makes a global impact. 2 weeks ago, I was honored to accompany President Zelenskyy to my home state of Pennsylvania, where we met with factory workers building munitions for Ukraine to use in defending its sovereign territory against Russia's unprovoked invasion. Those workers weren't policy experts. They are good, hardworking Americans doing their part to advance our national security and to combat Russia's ongoing threat to the international order. Americans in general are uniquely curious. Americans look to explore, to serve, and to help out wherever they are needed. It is part of our DNA, and sometimes it changes the world. I had the opportunity yesterday to visit the World Food Prize Foundation and meet with former Governor Branstad. We spoke at length about the founder of the World Food Prize, Dr. Norman Borlaug, and his profound impact on society. Dr. Borlaug studied in a one-room schoolhouse near Cresco, roughly an hour and a half north of here. He went on to study plant pathology and earn a doctorate, and his research eventually led him to Mexico. He knew exactly how to help Mexican farmers increase their production of wheat, but he couldn't communicate with them. So instead of giving up, he learned Spanish. His ongoing efforts eventually led to Mexico's ability to produce enough wheat to feed its population. The United Nations asked Dr. Borlaug to return his attention to India and Pakistan, and his efforts there spurred what is widely known today as the Green Revolution, saving hundreds of millions of lives in the two countries. His methodologies and innovations spread throughout the Middle East and North Africa and were ultimately applied to rice fields throughout Southeast Asia. Dr. Borlaug would go on to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for his role in combating hunger on a global scale. He later founded the World Food Prize and envisioned that the prize be the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for agriculture. To this day, the World Food Prize honors and promotes innovation in the fight against global hunger. So in Dr. Borlaug's case, foreign policy truly began at home with one man from rural Northeast Iowa who had a huge impact on millions across the world. Now, I can't close without putting in a bit of a plug for considering working in foreign policy, development, or even at the State Department one day. As I noted earlier, we have foreign service and civil service professionals from all 50 states, including a member of my own staff who was born and raised down the road in Waterloo. Jeff, thank you. It gets even better. One of the directors in our Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs was raised right here in Cedar Falls and graduated from UNI with a father who taught at UNI for 30 years. And one of my predecessors in India, Ambassador Nancy Powell, is a proud UNI graduate. All examples of Iowans having a global impact. And we hire from a wide variety of academic and professional backgrounds. Sure, we have our fair share of lawyers, yes, me, and folks with international relations degrees, but we need engineers, we need accountants, we need business majors, English majors, and science majors. We need doctors and nurses. I know that UNI is renowned for its education degree programs. I can't tell you how many teachers I know have become remarkable Foreign Service officers, supporting educational exchange programs, teaching others about American ideals, and engaging with young populations around the world. The more complete a cross-section of America we can put together within the State Department, the more effectively we can represent the complexity and diversity of the American people. You may think you need to speak a foreign language to join the Foreign Service. You don't. We'll teach you. We have a whole Foreign Service Institute devoted to teaching languages, tradecraft, leadership, and giving our new and more seasoned diplomats the tools they need to succeed when serving overseas. As you were entering the auditorium this afternoon, you may have noticed a booth outside advertising career opportunities at the State Department. Our diplomat in residence for the Central Region, Sarah Steele, who is also a native Iowan, would be delighted to discuss opportunities at State in both the Foreign and Civil Service. And if you didn't stop by already, I'd absolutely encourage you to do so later today. And whether or not you want to work for the State Department or another federal agency, I know you are going to have great opportunities ahead. UNI has trained you to be curious about the world, to have an impact, and to give back. However you decide to do that, know that this is an exciting, dynamic, and yes, complicated world. We can't simply turn away from it, and U.S. leadership is essential. We need you to be involved. It could be here on your campus, in your local communities, and if you choose to, maybe at an embassy or consulate one day too. So let me close by reminding you that, as President Eisenhower again once said, as diplomats, we may get to go to fancy summits and mingle with world leaders, but it is the work of everyday Americans, students and local leaders that can have the biggest impact. Don't ever underestimate the impact that you can have or where it will be felt. So, of all my travels as Deputy Secretary thus far, one of my most profound memories occurred during a recent trip to the Little League World Series in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Get a lot of tough assignments. Going to the Little League World Series was not one of them. As I walked around the compound, I met kids from all over the world, kids from every continent. They were playing video games together, eating lunch together, and building lifelong friendships. The championship game, if you didn't see it, it was between a team from Florida and a team from Chinese Taipei. This was an all-timer classic game. The Florida team was down throughout the entire game, but clawed back to send it to extra innings at the very end. Florida ended up winning on a crazy play at the plate. But those 12-year-olds did not burst into celebration. They were so empathetic towards the Chinese Thai players who were dejected, many of them crying, at letting the championship slip away, that those kids from Florida immediately went over to console their opponents, offering hugs and showing tremendous kindness. The grace that both teams showed at the end of such a hotly contested game serves as an example to all of us. I'm sure none of them went into that game thinking they'd make an impact on the world, but they made a tremendous impact on everyone around the world that was watching them. You never know when a little grace or a little kindness can make a huge difference. That was diplomacy at its best in the heartland of Pennsylvania at a Little League World Series championship game. Foreign policy begins at home. So thank you again for the countless kindnesses that you showed my dad here during his time in Cedar Falls. Thank you for all that you do to keep America strong through your hard work and your unshakable values. I will leave here today in much the same way I've left all of my overseas destinations, inspired and proud to represent America and its people. I know the years ahead will be full of challenges, no question about it. But I also know that if we continue to learn from and build upon the work of our past, and all of you continue to stay involved, the future of America is incredibly bright. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Happy to take questions. Mr. President, I'll defer to you as to where this goes from here.
We have a microphone in the back if anybody has a question.
questions, comments, don't be shy. Right here, up here in the front.
Hello, sir. My question for you was, give me a second. My question for you was, so who was the one in your family that originally came here from India? Oh, why did you come here originally?
Yeah, it's a great, why my dad came here in
Yeah, why
19
did your dad originally?
Yeah, it's a great question. I asked him that many times because he was in a small village in northern India. So to find Cedar Falls, of all places, but he was a teacher. This was a renowned place for teaching in the early 60s. He tells me he was awarded a Ford Foundation Fellowship to come here. We still can't find that Ford Foundation Fellowship, but whatever it is, he came here. There's some amazing correspondence between my dad and the university going back to that period, where my dad actually asked for a map of the United States so that he can figure out like where he's coming. They wrote back saying, don't worry, we'll explain to you where Iowa is, it'll be fine. Correspondence about how to get here, about taking this bus from New York City all the way here. They remind him to bring clothes like that are warm because this is going to be super cold from where he's coming from. My dad writes one letter that says, I'd like to bring gifts for all of my professors. And they write him back saying, please don't bring any gifts. This goes back on and on. And so he attends here from 1963 to 1964. What I only learned after my dad passed away this year and we were going through all of his files, that he didn't actually graduate until 4 years later. It took him 3 years to finish his thesis. And so I found this big red well of letters back and forth between him and his advisor, Professor Gordon Rum, who he would talk about his whole life. And these letters from Dr. Rum get increasingly focused on, we're waiting for that thesis. Another year has passed, and my dad is now getting his PhD in Canada, and so it all makes sense to me now that whenever I would contemplate asking for an extension on anything in high school, my dad was always like, absolutely not. You will not get an extension. But he ends up coming back here a couple summers and doing more research, and then he graduates in, I think it was August of 1968. But honestly, without that ecosystem, without the support that was provided, he never would have made it, through that degree. They stuck with him. They wanted him to come back here and teach high school. They wanted him to come back here and teach at UNI. And he ended up in the University of Pittsburgh. And again, it all worked out. But again, when I think about my own career, it takes people to stand by you and to support you and people to be there for you so that you can fall down, get back up, maybe be late on your dissertation. This institution stood by him. I am not standing up here as Deputy Secretary of State without the University of Northern Iowa. So I just, I couldn't express that more to you, how your ability to change not only a person's trajectory, but a family's trajectory, in this case, was so special, and we're really grateful.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you coming all the way out here to the Midwest.
All of my colleagues were like, why do you get to go to Iowa for 2 days?
Why do you get to come here? My question was, what originally drew you to careers in the State Department, and what inspired you to look into the field of international policy?
Thank you for asking that question. Actually, I told this to some of the students earlier. I wanted to be an astronaut, and I had Air Force ROTC scholarship, and I was going to be a fighter pilot and then go into astronaut training. And a couple things happened. One, I started working in Washington at a pretty early age, 18, 19, 20, working on Capitol Hill as an intern. And then I also discovered, frankly, I wasn't that good as an engineer. And so you have that reckoning with your own life about kind of what you're interested in and what you're good at. And it turns out, you know, there was a redirection. And I was very interested in international affairs, national security, public service, the law. So I kind of tried to stay within that little cone or bucket, not sure, not knowing where this would lead, not necessarily aspiring to have 3 different stints at the State Department, and just kind of piecing it together every few years based on that. Again, a lot of great mentors along the way, and a lot of people who guided me. Worked in the Senate and was able to again meet people like then Senator Biden, who was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. He had a staff director named Tony Blinken, who is now Secretary of State. And so that really helped me just seeing what was possible in this career field. But just been really, really lucky to work on these issues. It is no doubt a very, very complicated time. And these issues, a lot of these issues seem totally intractable. But again, I really believe U.S. leadership is essential at this time. So whatever you all end up doing, I hope you just think about, again, the role that you can have on what's taking place around the world. And the State Department opportunities are great, and I mentioned them, but you can have an impact in so many other ways, so many other ways. We need people who know, obviously, agriculture and science and how to deal with the impacts of climate change and critical minerals and advanced technologies. Like the science and the technology is moving faster than governments can move. And so we need to bridge those differences in the speed in which technological change is happening. And that, I think, is both exciting and kind of daunting in the years ahead.
Hello, sir. I loved getting to hear the stories about your father and how much Iowa had an impact on you. I would love to hear, like, how have your 2 days in Iowa been? What have been your favorite experiences? Any highlights that you would like to share with us? I would love to hear more.
No, this is great. Thank you for asking. It's been about 24 hours, actually. So, you know, look, I think you all know this. This is a very unique state, and it is not like I've been to almost all 50 states. I've been to over 100 countries. I think you guys can easily say you have a unique history here. You have a commitment to learning and education. You've taken people in from all over the world. You produce these incredible products that get exported all around the world. I mean, you look at the population and then the level of exports that you have in agriculture and manufacturing. And I just think the best part has just been, frankly, coming here, meeting all of you, seeing this campus that I know my dad walked around on while his wife and 4 kids were still back in India, and how hard that must have been, how exciting it must have been to be here. And I can see that pathway as I have just walked around here today. So I guess being here is definitely the high point. I think we started planning this trip about 5 years ago, so I am glad we finally landed on it. And I hope it's not another 5 years before I'm back. But gosh, my dad tells so many stories about the people that he met here, and he remembers everyone so fondly.
Hello, sir. My question is that as someone from Muscatine and like knowing our history with like China and the exchange programs, which I recently got to go on one, would you say that like having proper exchanges with schools and having students come and go from communities, would you say that's is it an important goal for the State Department? Would you say that you like that as a goal?
Absolutely. I think, look, we are trying to increase people-to-people contacts around the world. And we think when people get to know each other, when they get to work with each other, when they get to play Little League Baseball with each other, it changes their perception of what people are really like. Because if you grow up learning that a particular place is bad, or if you're feeling, kind of negative about a particular issue or place, and then you actually sit across from that person, it does break down some barriers pretty quickly. And I don't mean to suggest that there aren't bad people or bad governments. There are plenty of bad things happening in the world, and we have to deal with those. But these exchange programs can just open up your own personal horizons. They'll introduce you to people you never thought you would come across. And if you never, again, it's not about putting you on a pathway to be a diplomat, although that would be great. It's just giving you a tool, I think, to succeed in this century, which is really, I think, essential, which is having a sense of what's going on in other parts of the world. Because again, as I mentioned, this state is already so connected to the world. You're going to be more successful here if you understand what's happening in Mexico and Canada, obviously, but if you understand what's happening in China. China is a really complicated example. You brought it, I bring it up in the remarks, not to say everything is great. In fact, we're in a really challenging competition, but his perception of America was shaped here. It was a very positive perception. If you talk to Governor Branstad, one of the first things that Xi Jinping did was invite him over to recognize him and to thank the people of Iowa. And yet we have this incredibly complicated and sometimes dangerous relationship with China. But those people-to-people connections, frankly, are essential. And so, yes, so it could be an exchange program, it could be a business program, it could be a cultural program, it could be sports diplomacy, it could be music and art. We want to bring people together, frankly, outside of politics, outside of some of the things that divides us, because we need that today. We need that today in a world that is really, really complicated and often fractured.
Hi, Deputy Secretary. Thank you for being here today. Just had a question in regards to the world reserve currency and the BRICS nations. I know you discussed commodity prices, trade. What is the State Department, the federal government doing to retain that world dominance status for the world currency?
You mean on the dollar itself, or? Yeah. Look, I wish there was an economist up here to answer that question. I would just say, we are, from a State Department perspective, we are trying to open up markets. We are trying to break down barriers. We are trying to create more jobs overseas. And so, yes, we want American industry to continue to try to be as dominant as possible. So I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, in Johnstown. This was a town, when we moved there in 1971, steel mills were at full employment, coal mines were at full employment, and this was the part of the country that powered the war machine in World War II and World War I. It built all the materials that went into the Golden Gate Bridge and the Empire State Building came from Western Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And then globalization really did leave this community behind. And so I understand the concern, I understand the anger at international trade and about, what happens to U.S. jobs overseas, when jobs get shipped overseas. In fact, when I was ambassador, if I went to the opening of a new factory in India, and it was an American company, Ford, GM, GE, I always said to them, I said, tell me the American story as to why this is good. Why is this good for an American worker, an American investor? And they would explain to me, like, this is one part of the supply chain. It's better if they do it here. They'll be more competitive on the global market. But that was an important test for me. That's a long way of saying, in our role at the State Department, we're not as much focused on currency, and I defer to my Treasury friends and our Fed friends, but we are focused incredibly on American competitiveness, American industries, American jobs, and bringing additional investments to try to into the United States to support the American economy. So I'm going to answer the question that way without diving too much into the currency related part of it. I see a hand that went up in the back there.
Sir, you give great examples in your speech that
I can't hear you. Just
diplomacy and relationships start from a very local level. As I was teaching here at UNI, I felt like the people here and the students here, they want to know each other. I mean, they want to kind of travel abroad. They want to have people come here, just like, you know, your personal experience and many other examples you give in your talk. But I feel like in the past couple of years that there are things that we see, like students can, you know, it's really hard to get visas coming over here, and it's very hard, not just the pandemic causing those travel disruptions, but I think it's more of the political part that causing extra difficulty or barriers for people to actually get to know each other, to communicate beyond the major medium channel. So I think my question, if I phrase it correctly, that how does your the Department of State would help, you know, or do they representing the ordinary people, or do they have to align their agenda with a party, kind of on their party line?
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, I mentioned, I think Jeff will tell me if I get this wrong, but we had 67 million people come from around the world to the United States last year. 67 million. That's a lot, right? So that's a mix of tourists, students, business people, exchange people. To get to the United States, you need some travel authorization to get here. Just as if you decided tomorrow you wanted to go to, I don't know, Egypt, or if you wanted to go to Brazil, you'd go online and you'd say, what do I need to go to one of those countries? Sometimes it could just be a passport. Sometimes it's a visa requirement. Maybe nothing. Maybe, you know, if you go to Canada or Mexico, oftentimes your driver's license will do it. So of those 67 million people, they've got to do the same thing that we have to do when we travel. There's about 40 countries in the world that don't require a visa to come to the United States. They have visa-free travel. And this has happened because over a period of years, they have demonstrated that when people visit here, they actually leave here. Because what we don't want is people who are visiting here to overstay their lawful authority. And in most countries, that's can be 60 days or 90 days, 120 days. So we have about 40 countries. And those 40 countries are where most of those 67 million are coming from. From the other countries, they actually do have to apply for a visa to come to the United States. We don't look at politics. Like, it's not really a political question. It is a security question. It is a kind of economic question. Will they return? And then it's a volume question. In other words, can we handle the volume of people who are coming up to the window? So for example, in India, last year they issued more than 1 million visas to people. Now, I don't know the exact number of consular officers we have at the State Department. Can you imagine the volume that takes to get, and everyone, the first-time applicants all require an interview. You have to go up to the window. I mean, my dad still, again, just back to my dad, he tells a story about how they drove 300 or 400 miles. My grandfather bought him a suit. They practiced. You know, they had all the paperwork ready, and he was super nervous, he said, that day that he waited in line at the consular section in New Delhi, and they approved his visa because he had this admission letter from UNI. Now, again, 60 years later, I would go out and stand in that line with people, and I would see young people in suits, super nervous, who had driven hundreds of miles, and I was like, okay, this is a very familiar story. So the State Department has a security responsibility. There's fraud in the system. We've got to stamp that out. There are some bad people trying to get to the United States. We've got to keep them from coming. We've got to keep people coming for valid reasons, and that's what we try to look at. And we are, again, I think, doing a pretty good job at this. There are only 4 or 5 countries in the world where the backlog is longer than we would like it. India, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia. That may be it. Otherwise, we're back to fairly routine processing times. But again, not everyone is going to be able to go up to the window and get approved. And I think that's what disappoints people. These are judgments that are made very tough. When you're a consular officer, you're making that judgment based on a 3-minute interview, based on maybe 4 or 5 documents that they've presented. So I have so much regard for those consular officers, but we really try to keep politics out of it. We try to get people here as quickly and efficiently as we can while still maintaining those security responsibilities. And we work closely with DHS, with other agency partners, but it's a huge part of what we do. And every Foreign Service officer goes and serves a consular tour, first or second tour when they come into the department, because we want everyone to have that skill set. Hope that gives you a little bit more context about what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it better. Happy to take any feedback on how we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Verma, for speaking and being here today. I am a graduate student from Okoboji, Iowa. I heard you comment on making funnel cakes in Okoboji being part of the American experience, and I can agree with that in some ways. I'm very privileged to be a student here and very excited to be here. I'm also of minority status, coming again from Okoboji. And I am wondering if you could additionally speak on just the inspiration that you have from the people that you've seen, the places you've been, et cetera. There's a lack of public transportation here and some other discouraging aspects of policy. And because of all of us who love to learn and continue to put effort towards social change, maintenance, and sustainability, I wonder if you could speak on our balancing going home to our families, going home to our social lives, et cetera, and then continuing to do what we do here and go forward with that. If you could give us some advice, just continue to inspire us, please.
Oh, thanks. I think on this one, I need advice from all of you on how to get that balance, right. I think that, look, this is something we all struggle with in our lives, and I'm out here looking at all of you, whether you're a student or a faculty member. I think the amount of incoming each day into our lives can feel super overwhelming. I go back to a speech that Colin Powell gave at the State Department in 2001, where he was committing to every State Department officer that they would all have an internet connection at their desk. That's how we were pretty far behind, let's say. And now today, I think if you asked everybody, do you still want that internet connection? I'm not sure everyone would want that. And I think, look, these are trade-offs, and it's not a you're never going to get it exactly right, and you may, frankly, be out of balance for a little while. In other words, you may have a month or even a year where you are not seeing your family as much, you're not doing the kind of personal stuff that you want to do, but it's required maybe to get through that difficult year, or you have intensive studies, or you need someone in your family needs additional help. We just have to realize that, as I was saying to the students earlier, life does not move in an upward straight line. And if it did, it would be a lot easier, but just know that you've got this great network here of people to support you. You're not always going to get that balance right, but I think about what just hearing the president for the last few hours, I think what I come away from this institution understanding is that I think they really just want you to give back and have an impact in some way. And I was really inspired looking at the pictures coming in here and seeing that Eleanor Roosevelt spoke here. And she gives a great speech. She was an envoy at the United Nations, I think for women's issues, and she gives a great speech last century where she talks about how the real battle for social justice and equality and dignity doesn't take place in the halls of Congress or the United Nations. It takes place in those places that are unseen on any map. In the bars, the neighborhoods, the cafes, the athletic fields, the schoolyard. And her point was, and it's exactly like President Eisenhower's point, it is, don't forget about the impact that you can have, like, right in front of you. You know, that person that may need a helping hand, that person who may not feel comfortable speaking out, that person that just could use your support, that person may be right next to you, that person may be, again, in your community. So as we go, you know, gosh, this is going to sound like Dorothy from It's a Wizard of Oz, but as you go searching for your heart's desire and your dream, it may be, you know, like right here in your backyard. And I think sometimes we forget that. And sometimes that's required. We have to go perhaps around the world a few times to realize that our real heartstream and our passion was right here all along.
Hi, Mr. Verma. Thank you for coming. I appreciate hearing all your stories, especially of your father. I offer you my condolences for his passing, but it seems like he lived a really great and fulfilling life.
Thank you.
You mentioned that this Iowa trip has been in the works, like it was planned 5 years ago, and doing the math, I remembered that COVID happened, and even though it seems so far away now, when it hit hard. So my question is, how did COVID impact the work of the State Department?
Huge, and it impacted, you know, I think about our embassies around the world had to deal with how many countries there are in the world, you know, 200 different sets of rules and regulations. We were impacted like everyone else, but we also had to continue to provide services to people. There were Americans stranded everywhere in the world. There were Americans that continued to get put into you know, facilities that they shouldn't have been into, mandated to go to for medical reasons. So it was super hard for the entire federal government, but because we had this global footprint, it was very hard on the workforce and on our institutions, but folks were super resilient. And you know, what I've learned from our workforce, from our USAID partners, our Peace Corps partners, our DoD partners, people generally lean in when there are moments of crisis like that. You know, we'll say no matter what research people were doing or what predictions people were doing, no one really thought that a virus could spread to 135 countries in 30 days, which is what happened, and kill 20 million people in 3 years, which is also what happened. That was not really a model that we were operating under. And so, what, you know, from bad things can come a good thing. And let me tell you what the good thing is. We are today trying to ensure that we are better prepared, not just the United States, and there's teams of people at HHS and Congress and others working on that, but internationally. And if you were to grade how we did internationally, you'd give us somewhere between a C- and let's say not a passing grade. Different rules on travel, different rules on testing, different rules on supply chains. I mean, you name it. We had a different architecture. This is one of those problems, you know, what I described as a problem without a passport. Like you can't use an army to bomb this problem into submission. You've got to solve this problem through international cooperation. So we have spent now thousands of hours and thousands of our workforce working on making sure we have an international plan for if and when that next pandemic hits. We know what the rules will be. We know where the vaccines will be. We know how to distribute those. Now, this is really hard stuff because every country kind of has their own view about how this should go, but we're working towards hopefully a consensus. So this is one of those areas we got to do better internationally. And so again, you can have a big debate about whether, you know, how involved we should be in the world. This one, we don't really have a choice. Like the nexus of these things and how important they are to our security, our prosperity, we've got to be out in front leading, and we're trying to do that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Verma. My name is Carolina Coronado Park, and I'm the Director of International Engagement here at UNI. I have I'm proud to serve international students and visiting scholars here on campus. Right now, we have 201 international students from 47 different countries. And my question to you is, you had talked about the importance of international education and the impact of international education to connect locals with the world, and how it impacts not only personally, but also can change the perspective of any people around the world. So my question to you, you just said also that coming to Iowa has been postponed for a long time. We just had also 25 Korean students on campus, and when they were told that they were coming to Iowa, they were kind of surprised, looking forward to come to Iowa, to the Midwest, but I wasn't sure about what they were going to experience here. My question to you is, how can we elevate Iowa as a state, as a destination for international students to come to amazing institutions like UNI?
It's a great question. I should make very clear that the 5-year delay was a delay on my part and not on the administration's part. Because I was actually started writing a book about 5 years ago about this whole journey that my father took, and then going to India as ambassador, and then COVID hit, and then but it all finally worked out. So you should realize, like, this is a very competitive marketplace. So what do I mean by that? Like, not only are you competing against 49 other states, you're competing against dozens and dozens of other countries in the world who want those same foreign students. So we actually lose, if this is a competition, we lose a lot of students to Australia, to Japan, to countries in Europe, to Canada. So I think we have to tackle this like through multiple levels. As a government, we have to be out showcasing why it's good to study in the United States. We have to make it easy, as the comment in the back was about, like, if this is a super complicated process, then we're going to continue to lose good students. And so we actually have a whole bureau of the State Department that focuses on educational exchange programs. So we are leaning into this as much as we can. Your state officials, again, the governor met Governor Branstad yesterday. They are out all the time. Your senators are out all the time highlighting, and your congresspeople highlighting how good this state is. And then your university officials and your faculty members, your alumni networks, just have to be out, beating the drum about why Iowa, why Cedar Falls, why UNI. And I think you have a really unique value proposition here. And so don't forget that. I think that's really cool. I forgot to answer the question here about how I ended up in international affairs. I forgot to also answer, when I went back to India as ambassador, what I discovered about my mother and father is that, and they would never talk about this later in life, is that they were both actively involved in India's independence movement. So my dad was actually a bit of a campus rabble-rouser. He was not here, but when he was at university, he was protesting, detained for a little while because he was protesting and was kind of demanding India's independence. My mom would end up being a social worker, a teacher and a social worker, but trained at Gandhi's ashram for social workers. And so when you go back, you start to have all these people now in their 70s and their 80s start to come out of the woodwork saying, hey, I was in this freedom movement with your dad, or I was a social worker with your mother. We liberated, all these women and helped them get educated. And so what I realized is that service, politics, public affairs was kind of in my parents' DNA. They absolutely did not want to pass that on to their kids because it was like, okay, you just have to keep your head down. We're new to this country. You'll go get a job as ideally a doctor or an engineer. It was funny when I got nominated to be ambassador, a friend of mine called me and he said, okay, maybe this is the one thing where your parents won't be disappointed you didn't go to medical school. No, I'm still not convinced by that. But I did learn, like, okay, it was part of our DNA, and my parents had been deeply involved in policy and kind of public causes. So I guess the apple didn't fall too far from the tree.
Deputy Secretary Verma, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for your motivation, your words of wisdom. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to hear from you. Thank you. Please join me in thanking Deputy Secretary Verma. We have a meet and greet just out in the hallway here. I understand that there are cookies and some beverages and things, so we'll be out in just a little bit. Thanks again.